I still remember the weight of it in my palm, cool and impossibly heavy for something so small. 6 carats of flawless diamond nestled in platinum, throwing splinters of light against the walls of my bedroom. A ring like that should have felt like a promise, a testament to years of shared love. Instead, it felt like a cruel joke. Because I knew with a certainty that hollowed me out that this engagement ring was never meant for me. I found out by accident, or maybe by fate. A notification popped up on our shared iPad one afternoon, a thank you email from Cartier addressed to Mr. Thomas Barrett for his significant purchase. At first, I thought it must have been some mistake, maybe a client gift from his firm. But my chest tightened, and I couldn't let it go. I checked our joint credit card statement, hands trembling, and there it was, a six-figure purchase. When I called the jeweler to confirm, their hushed voice told me exactly what I dreaded to hear. That night, I sat at our mahogany dining table, the one we'd picked together when we bought our first home. The box lay open beside my plate, the velvet interior cradling the diamond. I had found it hidden in the lining of Thomas's leather briefcase, the very one I had gifted him for our 10th anniversary. The irony seared through me like fire. Working late again, I had texted even as my fingers shook. "Yes, darling, big client meeting, don't wait up." I stared at his words until they blurred. How many times had I read those excuses? How many nights had I curled up alone, proud of my hard-working husband, while he whispered promises to someone else? I poured myself a glass of the Bordeaux he'd been saving for a special occasion. It seemed appropriate. The wine was rich, velvety on my tongue, but carried an aftertaste that was bitter, almost acrid. Betrayal always tastes that way, I suppose. The house suddenly felt cavernous, every room echoing with memories I could no longer trust. Did he bring her here while I was away visiting my sister? Did they sit on the sofa I had chosen, laughing at my ignorance? My phone buzzed again. "Love you. Don't forget the Westfield Gala next Saturday." The charity gala, our annual performance where Boston's elite gathered to preen and pretend their donations absolved their sins. Where Thomas and I played the perfect couple, him the brilliant financier, me the flawless event planner. And of course, Isabel Lawrence would be there. Beautiful, poised Isabel, recently divorced, recently employed at Thomas's firm, who touched his arm just a second too long when she greeted him. Isabel, whose laugh had filled 3 restaurants where we had accidentally crossed paths. Isabel, who had fingers slender enough for a ring like this. I slipped the diamond onto my own hand. It was too loose. It slid against my knuckle as though rejecting me. The stone caught the chandelier's glow, scattering it into shards across the room. Something in me fractured with it. I typed a reply, forcing my lips into a smile even though no one could see it. "Can't wait for the gala. I've been working on something special." That week moved like a fever dream. Once you glimpse the truth, you can't unsee it. Suddenly, every gesture became evidence. The way he set his phone face down. The showers he rushed to take the second he got home. The perfume he once adored on me now gave him allergies. I turned into a detective in my own marriage, assembling a mosaic of lies. Dinners I never attended, hotel receipts in our own city, a weekend stuck at the office while my mother was in surgery, yet there he was in New York. One afternoon, I decided to surprise him at work with his favorite lunch, something I hadn't done in years. The receptionist's strained smile told me everything before her words did. "He's in a meeting with Ms. Lawrence." I left the bag on her desk, polite as ever, but my ears caught the sound of laughter trailing down the hallway. I followed my steps, quiet against the carpet. Through the crack of a half-closed door, I saw them. Not poring over documents, but seated close, his hand resting on her knee, her fingers tugging at his tie. "She has no idea," Isabel whispered. "She's too comfortable in her little world of charity lunches and book clubs." And Thomas laughed. He actually laughed. "She doesn't ask questions. It's easier that way. After the gala, we'll figure it out. The ring was just the beginning." I backed away before I shattered. In my car, I collapsed into a mess of sobs that shook my ribs, ugly and raw. That night, I dressed up, made his favorite meal, set the table like nothing had happened. He barely glanced at me. Over dinner, he checked his phone under the table, thinking I wouldn't notice. I've been thinking about getting more involved with the gala this year, I said, casually filling his glass. He looked up, relief flashing across his face, probably glad I was occupied. That's great, Claire. Whatever makes you happy. Whatever makes you happy. As if happiness was a hobby, not the marrow of my life he had hollowed out. Later, when he was asleep, I crept to my hidden safe and added the diamond ring to my growing pile of evidence, credit card statements, screenshots, recordings. I whispered to myself as I closed the door. I gave him everything, and he threw me away like I was nothing. But I wasn't nothing, and he was about to learn that. The days leading up to the gala felt like an eternity, and yet passed in a blur. Every time Thomas smiled at me, every absent-minded kiss on the cheek, every bland conversation about the weather or the stock market made my skin crawl. He thought I was still asleep, walking through my marriage, still too naive or too trusting to see. But inside me, something sharp and alive had awoken, and it was whispering one word over and over: enough. On Tuesday, I made my first real move. I called Eleanor Westfield, the formidable woman behind the gala, someone I knew from my years organizing charity events. She answered with her usual grace, her voice silky and precise. "Claire Barrett, what a pleasant surprise." "Eleanor, I hope I'm not disturbing you," I said, my tone sweet but deliberate. "I wanted to discuss a special contribution for the auction this year." She perked up immediately. "Not at all, dear. We're always grateful for last-minute additions, especially from someone with your impeccable taste." My hand tightened around the phone. "I have a diamond ring, a Cartier, very valuable, and I think it could make quite the centerpiece." Her silence lasted a beat too long, curiosity sharpening her words when she replied. "Intriguing. Our guests do love items with provenance." "Yes," I said slowly. "And this one has a story. I'd like to present it myself." That was not their usual format. Items were auctioned quietly, discreetly. But by the end of our call, Eleanor was practically giddy with anticipation. The ring was secured as the grand finale, and I would have the stage. But that was only half the plan. I needed protection leverage and a safety net. For that, I called Patricia Wong, my old college roommate turned one of Boston's toughest divorce attorneys. I hadn't spoken to her in months, not since Thomas suggested her aggressive personality was a bad influence. "Patricia, it's Claire," I said when she picked up. My voice sounded foreign, clipped with determination. "Claire, you sound different. Is everything okay?" "I'm about to make it okay. Can you see me today and bring your financial forensic expert?" 2 hours later, I was in her office, spreading my evidence across her desk. Bank statements with unusual withdrawals. Property records linking Thomas to a waterfront condo bought through a shell company. Screenshots of texts recovered from the cloud. And finally, the Cartier box. Patricia opened it and let out a low whistle. "Well, this is what we call a smoking gun. I want everything ready to file right after the gala," I told her, my voice steady. She studied me with a mix of admiration and caution. "This doesn't sound like the conflict-avoidant Claire I used to know." "That Claire is gone," I said simply. By Friday, the divorce papers were drawn up, ready for my signature. My emergency fund, the one Thomas mocked as unnecessary, was finally going to serve its purpose. My sister had prepared her guest room for me, and Eleanor had confirmed the special spotlight, the microphone, and the videographer would all be ready. The gala would not just expose Thomas, it would set me free. Saturday morning, Thomas announced he had to run into the office for a last-minute client emergency. He said it too quickly, avoiding my eyes. "Will you be back in time to help me set up?" I asked lightly, sipping my coffee. He hesitated, then smoothed his expression. "Might be cutting it close. Why don't you go ahead? I'll meet you there." Exactly as I'd hoped. When he left, I packed a small overnight bag into my car. Then I dressed for war. Not the conservative blue gown Thomas liked, but a crimson dress that fit like a second skin, bold and unapologetic. I styled my hair differently, painted my lips in defiance, and fastened my grandmother's diamond earrings, the ones Thomas had once suggested I sell, because they were outdated. For the final touch, I slipped the Cartier ring into my clutch. Tonight, it wouldn't symbolize their secret love. Tonight, it would become my weapon. The Westfield mansion glittered with chandeliers and fairy lights, the lawn transformed into a spectacle of wealth and power. Guests in silks and tuxedos arrived in chauffeured cars, laughter ringing under the tent. I walked in alone, crimson, cutting through the sea of muted tones. Eyes followed me, whispers trailed behind. Eleanor herself hurried over, her expression one of delighted shock. "Claire, you look radiant," she said warmly. "Everything is arranged exactly as you requested. The ring is ready, the videographer set. Are you certain about this?" I smiled, the first real smile I'd felt in months. Sometimes convention needs to be broken. I moved through the crowd, accepting compliments, brushing off questions about Thomas with a casual, "He'll join later." Across the room, I spotted Isabel, resplendent in silver, her hair swept elegantly back. Her smile toward me was polite, but I could see the calculation in her eyes, the way women assess each other when they know the battlefield is love. But tonight, the battleground was mine. Thomas arrived 40 minutes late, his bow tie slightly askew, his face flushed with the energy of a man juggling lies. I watched him from across the ballroom as his eyes swept the crowd, lingering on Isabel before finally landing on me. For a moment, confusion flickered over his face, perhaps at my transformation, perhaps at the fact that I was standing tall and radiant, unshaken. He approached, leaned in to kiss my cheek, and murmured, "Claire, you look different." "Thank you," I replied coolly. I didn't bother clarifying whether his words were meant as praise or unease. "I'm presenting a special item tonight." He blinked, startled. "I thought you were just helping with logistics." But before he could press further, Eleanor clinked her glass, and the guests turned their attention to the stage. Dinner was announced, and Thomas was led to a table separate from mine, a detail I had carefully arranged with Eleanor under the guise of networking. I sat through dinner with impeccable composure, sipping champagne, nodding politely, but watching Thomas and Isabel with quiet detachment. Their glances across the room, their synchronized disappearances, 12 minutes for him, then nearly the same for her. They thought they were so clever, so discreet. But tonight, discretion had an expiration date. At 9 o'clock sharp, the auction began. One by one, lavish items were presented, rare vintages, private villas, priceless artwork. The room buzzed with excitement, laughter, and the shimmer of champagne-fueled generosity. And then at last, Eleanor took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice brimming with anticipation for our final item tonight, "we have something extraordinary, presented by one of our most dedicated supporters, Claire Barrett." A spotlight swung to me. I stood, crimson dress glowing under the light, and walked to the stage with measured grace. My clutch was in my hand, and in it the Cartier box. My pulse hammered, but my voice was steady when I reached the microphone. "Good evening," I began, letting my gaze sweep the crowd. "Tonight I have the privilege of offering a piece not just of beauty, but of truth. This is a Cartier engagement ring, 6 carats of flawless diamond and platinum valued at 6 figures. I opened the box slowly, letting the diamond catch the light, throwing fire across the tent. A murmur rippled through the audience. "But its real value," I continued, "lies not in its carats or its craftsmanship, but in what it represents." I let the silence stretch, the tension thick as smoke. "This ring was purchased 1 month ago by a husband for his mistress." The tent gasped as one. Heads swiveled, eyes darted. My voice rang clear, strong, unflinching. A man who thought that 15 years of marriage could be discarded, replaced by a shiny new distraction. Across the room, Thomas had gone rigid, his face draining of color. Isabel was frowning, leaning forward as though to see the ring more clearly, unaware the spotlight was about to shift her way. "You might wonder," I said, my tone calm but sharp, "how such a private item found its way to tonight's auction. The answer is simple. I found it." On cue, the screens lit up with the evidence I had prepared. First, the credit card statement, Thomas's name clear as day beside the Cartier purchase. Then a photo, Thomas and Isabel entering a hotel, his hand pressed intimately against the small of her back. A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. "For anyone unfamiliar with the cast of this little drama," I continued, "the husband in question is my own Thomas Barrett. And the mistress, she's with us tonight." The spotlight pivoted, catching Isabel mid-rise from her chair, her face frozen in horror. On the screens, more images appeared, text messages between her and Thomas plotting their future, discussing the ring, referencing me as an obstacle to remove. Gasps turned to whispers, whispers to outrage. Eleanor stood at the back of the tent, eyes wide, but she didn't intervene. She knew exactly what I was doing. Thomas stood abruptly, pushing back his chair. "Claire, this is inappropriate. You're embarrassing yourself." I smiled, a razor-thin smile. No, Thomas. For the first time in years, I'm not embarrassing myself. I'm telling the truth. The security I had quietly hired stepped forward, blocking his path to the stage. He could only stand there, caught between fury and helplessness, while every eye in the room pierced him like a blade. The proceeds from this ring, I said, holding it high, will go directly to the women's shelter on Hamilton Street, to help women rebuild their lives after leaving toxic relationships. And to start the bidding, I'll offer 20,000 of my own. The room erupted first in shock, then in applause. Hands shot up. Voices called out bids. It was like a wave of solidarity rising around me, lifting me higher than I'd ever stood. From the corner of my eye, I saw Isabel attempt to slip toward the exit, her silver gown shimmering under the lights. But security was already stationed at every door. No one would escape before this auction ended. The bids climbed, the energy feverish. 50,000, 80, 100. Patricia Wong. My attorney raised her hand at 100,000, smiling directly at me as if to say, I've got you. Thomas was crimson now, his desperation leaking through. Finally, he shouted above the noise, 200,000. The room fell silent. 200,000, he repeated, his voice cracking. And a public apology to my wife. I regarded him coolly, my voice like steel. The bid is acknowledged. The apology is not necessary. His face crumpled, his voice breaking as he pleaded, Claire, please, don't do this, we can talk. We're well past talking, I cut in. You made your choices, now I'm making mine. Before he could reply, Patricia raised her hand again. 250,000. The tent exploded with noise, gasps, and murmurs. Thomas spun toward her, his fury barely contained. This is between me and my wife, he spat. I raised the microphone again. Correction, Thomas. As of 9 o'clock this morning, when Patricia filed my divorce papers, I am no longer your wife. I'm simply the woman you betrayed. The silence that followed was thunderous. Thomas froze, his mouth still open, his protest cut short by the finality of my words. The tent erupted, gasps, murmurs, a ripple of applause, as though the crowd itself had been waiting for this moment. I stood taller, the Cartier ring still glinting in my hand, its fire matching the blaze in my chest. The proceeds of this ring, I repeated, steady and resolute, will not line the pocket of deceit. They will go to women who need a chance at freedom just as I needed mine. 250,000 going once, I called out, my voice ringing with authority. 300,000. The words cut through the air like a blade. The crowd turned a hush, falling as a man stepped forward. Tall, confident, familiar in a way that made my breath catch. James Harrington. My first love from college, the man whose letters I had once pressed under my pillow, the man Thomas had always been jealous of without reason, or perhaps with too much. He'd returned to Boston months ago, and we had met for coffee as friends. But now here he was, stepping into the fire of my broken marriage, with a voice that trembled with conviction. 300,000, he said again, his eyes locking on mine, steady and unwavering. Sold, I announced, my voice carrying over the stunned silence. To the gentleman who understands the true value of loyalty. The tent erupted into applause, louder this time. Unrestrained, a chorus of voices rising as though the entire room had taken my side. Thomas stood frozen, the ring stripped from his control, his reputation unraveling thread by thread in front of Boston's elite. Isabel sat collapsed in her chair, her face pale, her silver gown suddenly dull under the harsh glare of truth. I held the microphone one last time. Let this ring be a reminder. No woman should ever doubt her worth or accept less than respect. Tonight, this diamond doesn't belong to betrayal, it belongs to redemption. Applause thundered around me, flashes from cameras sparking like fireworks, capturing every angle of Thomas's downfall. And then with a final nod, I stepped down from the stage. It's been 6 months since that night. 6 months since the gala that Boston's high society still whispers about as the diamond auction. 6 months since I walked out of a marriage that had turned into a carefully decorated prison. The divorce was finalized quickly. The mountain of evidence, combined with the viral footage of the auction, left Thomas with little room to fight. His firm put him on indefinite leave after several women came forward with stories of his inappropriate behavior. Isabel vanished from the city altogether, fleeing west to chase a new beginning, or perhaps to outrun her shame. I sold the house, every corner of which had been poisoned by memory. Instead, I bought a small brownstone in Back Bay filled with colors Thomas had disapproved of, with furniture that was chosen only for me. For the first time in years, I breathed freely in a space that reflected no one but myself. The diamond ring itself never returned to my possession. James had donated it back to Eleanor's foundation, and now it sits in a glass case at the women's shelter, mounted beneath a plaque. Your worth is not determined by those who failed to value you. Every time I visit, I see women pause before it, their eyes softening, something shifting deep within. The ring that once symbolized betrayal has become a beacon of survival. James and I see each other often. Dinners, long walks, quiet talks that don't demand more than I can give. There is comfort in his presence, a reminder of the girl I used to be before compromise hollowed me out. Maybe we'll become something more. Maybe we won't. For now, it is enough to have someone who sees me as whole, not as an accessory to his ambitions. Thomas wrote me a letter last week. He claimed he had changed, claimed he regretted everything. Once I would have clung to those words, dissected them for hope. This time I fed the letter into the shredder. He doesn't get to narrate my story anymore. People sometimes ask if I regret making my revenge so public. They wonder if it was too brutal, too theatrical. I always smile and answer the same way. When someone tries to erase you, the most powerful thing you can do is make yourself unmissably visible. The truth is, I did not just reclaim my dignity. I discovered that I had never needed Thomas or any man to validate my worth. The greatest revenge was not humiliating him or even freeing myself. It was standing in front of that glittering crowd, unashamed and unbroken, and realizing I was the author of my own story. The diamond was supposed to crown a love built on lies. Instead, it became the first brick in the path of my new beginning. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever been told you were not enough, let my story remind you, you are more than their deception. You are more than their choices. You have always been enough. And if this story touched you, if it made you feel seen, please like this video, share it so others might find strength too, and subscribe for more stories that shine light on the truths we often hide. Leave me a comment below. I'd love to know your thoughts, your stories, your strength.